Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Amy, Mayor Daley, Governor Quinn, Carrie, Ethel, Mayor Veltroni, wonderful to see you again. I thank you and President Gorbachev for what you were doing here. I thank the sponsors, the other Nobel laureates who are here. And I'd like to say a special word of thanks, since my life is very much wrapped up in Haiti today, to my friend Sean Penn. Thank you, and thank you, Petrony Mikova, for the work you do in Haiti. Sean Penn was, I always say, it was not a drive-by celebrity in Haiti. He's the only movie star I ever met who would move into a mud dump tent for 3 months to make sure that people's dignity and children's lives were preserved. I thank you for that. I love Rob Emanuel, and I think he's a fabulous mayor. And he was famous, sometimes infamous, in the White House for never gilding the lily. Tonight he gilded the lily. He illustrated in that introduction Clinton's third law of politics, which is, whenever possible, be introduced by someone you have given a great appointment to. They will inflate your virtues, forget your vices, erase your mistakes in the history books, and you will love every minute of it. I thank Chicago for hosting this important event. And I always tell people it's the best organized big city in America, maybe in the world. It gets me in trouble in New York City, of which I am a happy citizen. But I want to say a special word of thanks too to Walter Veltroni and to my good friend Mikhail Gorbachev, who's not here tonight, for what they are doing. I am deeply indebted to Mikhail Gorbachev for many things, but one that will be lost in the annals of dusty history books unless I mention it is, Mikhail Gorbachev made it possible for me to win a Grammy Award. And more important, to win it with Sophia Loren. For the three of us narrated for an environmental cause, Peter and the Wolf by Tchaikovsky, and then a new version called The Wolf and Peter, in which they all become alive in the second half to the dangers of deforestation, and everybody does the right thing, and the people and the wolf live happily ever after. I'd also like to say a special word of thanks to our wonderful singer, Miss Eunice. It was great. And I want to say I thought what you saw up here was an example of the world we can build if we want peace more than identity conflict. A woman whose father is a Nobel Prize winner from Bangladesh, singing the great African-American opera, Porgy and Bess, which was written after a genius Jewish composer from New York City hauled himself down to Charleston, South Carolina, and just parked himself at the port for 5 months and watched the African-American workers haul the cotton up and haul the other cargo up and load it onto the ships. He listened to them singing, he listened to them talking, He saw them talk with each other. He saw them talk with whites. He saw them being disrespected. He saw them in moments of joy and heartbreak. And in only 5 months, this genius, a Jewish immigrant son from New York City, barely 30, wrote Porgy and Bess. That's the world we can choose. The world of peace and cooperation and constant regeneration. But it is still a choice we have to make. This year's conference is focused on especially empowering young people to action. I think that's really important, and it's coming at a good time because yesterday was Earth Day in America. And since it was on a Sunday, I went to Kentucky today to observe it with 6,000 young people from every high school around Louisville, the biggest city in Kentucky, and all of the counties. Very near coal country, they have organized themselves into an action group to support sustainable development and a clean future and turning back the tide of climate change. And I thought to myself, what if every high school in America were its own NGO? What if they all adopted a public purpose and they wanted to be branded by that just as much as they are branded by their athletic teams or their musical units, their bands, their choruses? What a difference they can make in the world. I think it's important to empower young people because, as every Nobel Prize winner will tell you, the circumstances in which they won the prize are different from the circumstances many other people face in the world, with the exception of climate change, which embraces us all. I have been struck by how some people respond to conflict in a way that it amazes them to merge their identities, and how others walk away. After the tsunami in South Asia, the United Nations asked me to spend a couple of years working for them because they approved of the work that the first President Bush and I did, I guess, on the ground, primarily, but not exclusively, in Aceh and Indonesia. There had been a long-standing, simmering conflict in Aceh between two different ethnic groups. You would think that with all that misery and all that loss, the conflict would only get worse. But I asked Starbucks to send some people up to the hills where they live with new coffee beans and better instruction on growing. And we got some other people to come in and help them with different kinds of agriculture. And we let them guide us in how we rebuilt their areas. And pretty soon this long, simmering identity clash, which almost no one in the United States even knew about, reached a happy conclusion because they decided they'd rather work together for the common good than spend the rest of their lives fighting over a shrinking pie. But it doesn't always work out that way. I'm very honored that President de Klerk is here with us. I was thrilled when he won the Nobel Prize with my friend Nelson Mandela, because if he hadn't done what he did, the rest of the story would not have worked out as it did, and nobody should ever forget that. And I watched the Peace and Reconciliation Council that came out of that in an astonishing act of national accountability and honesty, but also reconciliation and forgiveness. I spend a lot of my life now in Africa working mostly in AIDS and tuberculosis, malaria, and building health systems, but also in developing the agricultural economy of a few countries where we work. And I never cease to be amazed when I go back to Rwanda, where I went in 1998 and apologized for entering so late that we did not stop the genocide. A reporter from a major American newspaper went with me and spent all his time, it was his job to do this, so I took no offense. When I went back after I left the White House in 2001 to announce that we'd be setting up the AIDS program, and eventually we, along with my friend Paul Farmer, who's known to many of you, we built hospitals back in every region of the country. They were all destroyed except the one in the capital city. So this reporter is riding with a Rwandan cab driver, and he says, "Aren't you just sick Bill Clinton's here? I mean, he didn't save you." He said, "No, I'm glad he's here." And they said, "Why?" He said, "Well, first of all, he did not make us kill each other. That was the decision we made. And secondly, at least he apologized. Nobody else has done that." I ask you all to remember that if sometime during the coming campaign season somebody disparages the president for apologizing for America, sometimes the best thing you can do is to say you're sorry. And if everybody who's ever said it to you, I'll bet you a dime to a dollar if you believe they were sorry, you thought more of them after they did it than before. So, anyway, the thing about Rwanda is they have local reconciliation operations. If you did something really terrible, they ship you off to the war crimes tribunal. But if you just participated in a whole bunch of killing, you get to go home. And if you tell the truth, the local council gives you, in effect, community service. The president said we don't have time to keep hating each other, and we don't have the money to build a jail system. So we'll just have to work it out with our neighbors. I will never forget the important role women played in Rwanda, partly because almost everybody who was killed was men, although there were a lot of women killed. About 80% of the victims were male. So half the women, half the governors were women when I got there. A lot of the mayors were when I started working. And the first time I went, I met a woman who told me that she awoke in a pool of her own blood after the machete wielders came through her village, and she said, "I woke and there was my husband and my 6 children lying dead around me, and I screamed out to God in anger that I had been spared. Then I realized I must have been spared for some reason, and it couldn't be something as mean as vengeance. So I do what I can to help us begin again." What this lady did was to set up a foster home where she took in orphans from all ethnic groups and placed them with families without regard to their ethnic groups. A few years later, we finished work on the beautiful Genocide Memorial, which is there, which is, among other things, a 3-tiered crypt with the bones of 300,000 Rwandans whose loved ones brought them there and registered them on a roll of honor, and a beautiful little museum. So, since I helped them build it, they couldn't wait for me to tour the museum. And this young Rwandan took me through the museum in a 3-piece suit, looking like a Harvard MBA, smiling like a movie star. He was unbelievable, and he's taking me through this, explaining how it all began, very scientifically, factually oriented description. And so I said, "Did you lose anybody?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "My mother, my father, my brother, my sister-in-law." He said, "If you stopped at my uncles, aunts, and first cousins, 73 people." And I said, "This must be really hard for you." He said, No, this is therapeutic. Our president says we have to face the truth, so we can't let it go." And I said, "You remind me so much of this woman I met the first time I came here." I told him the story, the one that said, he smiled, he said, "I should. She is my aunt. She lost 73 people in her family too." They made a decision to absorb grief far more profound than anything virtually any of the rest of us will ever have to endure. I know it's not a perfect place, and now there's been almost too much squelching of the identity of the groups, but you have to be awestruck by that. One Tutsi woman lost her husband and 7 of her 10 children. 3 survived only because they were already in the military. And she was a great basket weaver, so she went to a Hutu woman who was a good basket weaver. She said, "Look, I'm 50 years old, I lost 7 kids, I have no money, I have to start again. I'm a good basket weaver, you are too. we got to get over this. Let's work together. So they started a business. Pretty soon, women were coming in. Pretty soon, instead of selling the baskets on the road, they were selling them in stores in Kigali. Pretty soon, they were selling them at Macy's in New York City. Pretty soon, guys like me were buying them to give away as Christmas presents to my foundation supporters. It became so successful that young Rwandan men came there and asked to train. And so she trained them. One day, a 26-year-old man who'd been there for a year came to see her, and he said, "You've been wonderful to me, and you have given me this great job. I cannot live with myself anymore. I murdered one of your children. But I know you have sons in the military, so send for one of them to come and kill me. It will be just, and I will work for you every day until he comes." 7 kids down. She looked at him and she said, "What good would that do? I forgive you. Get up and go back to work." Could you do that? Those are the kind of people that, to me, embody the Nobel Prize. And somehow, everybody's got a legitimate beef about something. And with all this diversity, Ron was saying today he went to a school where there were people from 126 different national and ethnic groups in one school. Somehow we have to find a way to be proud of who we are. Proud of our roots, proud of our heritage, and still embracing. And if you think about it, one of the frustrations, we're all sitting around here on pins and needles, wondering about how the Arab Spring's going to come out, because we're afraid that dictatorship will be replaced by ethnic and religious conflict, because divisive identity will become more important than inclusive identity. One of the reasons we better watch this Syrian thing closely is, while we have limited options, if we don't do as much as we can as soon as we can, the extremists may move in under the belly of it and take it away from the diverse coalition of people who have really tried to make this a broad-based human revolution for human rights and peace. It's a choice. And every day, we all have to make it. We honor here people who made a choice. When President Laureates of Poland won the Nobel Prize, most of us who had looked at Poland from the outside were happy, because we remembered him standing up there and risking his life as a labor leader for freedom. I am one of the few Americans who ever saw it in public, in a private dinner, in a way that would have made him a little uncomfortable. Once when I was president, I went there, he entertained me, as was the custom. He had leaders of the parliament there, including a leader of a party in opposition to him, and they had the darndest argument at the dinner table you ever heard about agriculture policy. And Lex said to the other guy, he said, "You might as well be an old-style communist." And he said, "Well, at least we got a stable price for our potatoes." And I thought, this is what the Nobel Prize is for people to have an honest argument. Because they went out and got to work the next day. Nobody tried to put anybody else in jail. It was American, it was Polish, it was universal expression of debate and liberty in the best sense. I got a gift that I think at the time he thought, should we be having this fight in front of the American president? And I thought, this is peanuts compared to what the Congress says to me. But it proved the power of freedom. And I thank you for that. I thank Jody Williams for working to rid the world of landmines. We spent 53% of all the money the world spent when I was president for 8 years cleaning up those landmines. I remember one dark day when we lost a plane with 8 brave American service people who were trying to go into Angola because the mines were still blowing up kids years and years and years after the major conflict was over. thank my friend Muhammad Yunus, who told me after he got the Nobel Prize that a member of the Nobel Committee said to him as he finished his address, he said, well, now that you've got this, maybe Bill Clinton will stop worrying us every year. Because I shamelessly campaigned for him for 12 years to get the Nobel Prize. And do you know why? Because in this city, long ago in the early 80s, the South Shore Bank was making microcredit loans to Croatian American electricians and African American carpenters to try to save the South Side. And I thought, well, if we can do it here, maybe we should be able to do it in a poor rural area like Arkansas. And Hillary and I raised the money to set up the first microcredit bank in Arkansas. And then when I became president, we got the money to do it federally. And then when I left, the program died and President Obama and the Congress rekindled it. There were years in Bangladesh over the last decade when the political squabbling between the two dominant factions was so profound, it almost seemed that they didn't have a government. But the country kept humming along with 6% growth because Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen Bank and BRAC and the others committed to microcredit proved that actually, if you could actually give enough of them, you could lift an economy from the bottom even without a political system. Something that you can only find elsewhere in the last 50 years in northern Italy because they've had so much political turnover. It was an amazing thing. Muhammad Yunus needs your help now. The government's trying to take over the microcredit banks for reasons that are largely political. And the reason I mention this is because when most of us think of the Peace Prize, we think of the things Ram talked about. How close we got to peace in the Middle East. At least for 8 years, the death rate was about a third what it was before and a third what it was after among Israelis and Palestinians. And we think of Northern Ireland. But peace is not just the absence of bad things. And I like it when the Nobel Prize goes to someone who makes something good happen. I loved it when my great friend, who sadly is no longer with us, Wangari Maathai, won the Nobel Prize. Because she risked her life to make good things happen. To plant trees and to bring the soil back to life in Kenya and to make sustainable life possible. I loved it when the three women won the Nobel Prize last year. Because each in their own way, they were risking a great deal to make good things happen. And in general, I think if we ended discrimination and abuse of women around the world and put more women in positions of leadership, we'd probably have more good things happening. But the world is full of wonderful developments. Near here at the Fermi Lab at the University of Illinois, America's fastest superconducting super collider, basically smashing atoms together for peaceful purposes to measure what happens to subatomic parts. Last year did a study of a subatomic particle called muons. Traditional physics had always held that a positively charged particle had to be offset in equal amounts by a negatively charged one. That they had to be in balance, otherwise matter would not cohere and we would all just fly apart. The problem with this theory is no one could ever explain what scientists have observed. If that's true, how did we evolve from the primordial slime of single-cell organisms? If there was no dynamism within each atom. For the first time in the last year or so, here in Illinois, there was a measurement that seemed to say that ever so slightly, the positively charged muons outweighed the negatively charged ones. To which all of us scientifically ignorant but cockeyed optimistic people said, thank God. But think of it. If it is true, it could explain how we got from the premortal slime into these wonderful chairs tonight. It could explain the internal dynamics which would allow us to unify the sciences of physics, chemistry, and biology. It could open a whole new window on the world. There's a lot of great things going on in this world today. But you all know that it's still too unequal, it is still too unstable, and because of climate change, it is totally unsustainable. And I'm glad Mr. Pachori is here tonight, and when he and the UN panel and Al Gore won the Nobel Prize, I was thrilled about that, because we have to deal with it. Here's what I know. When I leave this world, there will still be plenty of problems. But what I hope will happen is there will be a world full of people like you. That everyone will feel that there has to be some space in their lives to do what you gave the Nobel Prize, or the committee did, to these winners for. That it is no longer enough to be a good citizen, to stay in school as long as you can, to work as hard as you can, to be as good a family person as you can, to raise the best children as you can, to obey the law of your country, to pay your taxes. You also have to find a way to step into the gap between where we are and where we ought to be, for citizens, private citizens, to do public good. It is something that can clearly change the world. There will be these persistent problems. They will often lead to conflict. They will always lead to dashed dreams. And especially with regard to climate change, they can ultimately end in disaster. But it won't happen if there are enough people whose hearts are filled with fire to do good in the larger sense, whether or not they have a political office or head a big corporation. That is the ultimate tribute we can pay to the Nobel Peace Prize, to be instruments of peace. And I would just say, I don't know if His Holiness the Dalai Lama is coming here or not, but you can't be around him or you read his books without understanding that here is a guy who could be a bundle of walking resentment. One of the funniest encounters I ever had as president went on Chinese national television in a press conference with President Jiang Zemin. I said, you know, you ought to meet with the Dalai Lama. You'd really like him. And when it was over, Jiang Zemin said, you know, I can't do that, but I probably would really like him. I said, I know, you're afraid you'd really like him. It would be a real problem for China. Why? You may think because of his life as a monk, he lives on a plane different from you and me, but he doesn't. He has trained his mind and ordered his heart so that he can live with an openness to reconciliation. He is immensely proud of being Tibetan, but I've seen him holding a golf club in his robes. It's a metaphor for what we all have to try to do and become. There is no reconciling the internal contradictions of the modern world unless we reconcile the internal contradictions of our own identities. You don't have to give up who you are. The young people of Chicago, the young people of America, they need to be inspired by these Nobel laureates, but they need to be inspired by the rest of us as well. To understand that no one is perfect, that a broken clock is right twice a day, and that 100% of humanity is condemned to live our entire lives between those two extremes, never reaching perfection and always being right at least twice a day. That means we have no right to turn what we're proud of and our identity into a weapon of war, a weapon of death, a weapon of oppression. Instead, we should unleash what we have in common. We are, after all, genetically 99.9% the same. Some say we're only 99.5% the same. But the world still needs the Nobel Prize because too many people spend 99.5% of their time thinking about the 0.5% of us that's different, and only 0.5% of their time thinking about the 99.5% of us that is just like everybody else on planet Earth. Chicago is in many ways the ultimate American city. It has always welcomed immigrants. It has always found some way to put one foot in front of the other and get the job done, whatever the job is. Today, the job of humanity is to spend just a little more of our time, our treasure, and our heart on what it is we have in common. Thank you, and God bless you.